Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Before I got into AA, I thought that the 12 steps were all about something about God and then apologizing to everybody you'd ever hurt while you were drunk or high, which for me was a pretty long list, and I couldn't imagine going back and finding people that I hadn't talked to in 20 years and apologizing to them for things they may not even remember, which it turns out is not really how it works. But that's really all I knew about the program. I didn't have a good understanding of it, and I just kind of thought it was all about figuring out how to not drink and use drugs. What I found when I started working the 12 steps, learning more about them and being taught what they're really all about, is that it's much less about alcohol and drugs and much more about a spiritual path in life, learning how to walk a spiritual path. And when I talk about a spiritual path, I talk about a life driven by values and finding the values in life that you feel are important and living an intentional life where you work toward those values. And then you try to become better at embodying those values over time. And the 12 steps has all the tools. It's got a formula for how you do this. And so, as an example, there's a part of the 12 steps where I really take a look at what values in life are important to me. What value, and I make a list of all these values. And then I can kind of say, okay, these are the values I want to embody. These are the values that I want to display every day. And then there's another part of the 12 steps where every day, at the end of the day, I take a look back at my day and I say, okay, are there any places during the day where I didn't live up to the values that I felt are important? And if there were places where I didn't live up to those values, that's okay. I don't beat myself up for it, but I give some good thought about how do I make some changes tomorrow so that I can do a little better. And that's the kind of thing that happens on this spiritual path. And when I started getting into this, I was shocked, because not only was it very different than what I thought the 12 steps were, but it was something I'd been looking for my entire life and didn't even know I needed. But the idea that I can follow this formula and just consistently improve as a person, I loved that idea. And that's what turned me on to the 12 steps when I got into them, because it was much less about how do I stay sober. Being sober is a huge part of it, but it was much less about how do I stay sober and much more about, to put it simply, how do I be a good person that I can be happy with? I want to read some about what Tommy Rosen says about it in Recovery 2.0. And I'll start with this. He says, the actual purpose of the 12 steps is to facilitate a spiritual awakening in the person who follows them, whereby one's thinking and perspective on the world shift considerably. While it is not usually a sudden experience like it was with Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, after a while, a person who has worked the 12 steps can reflect that they have changed to such an extent that they no longer identify with the person they once were. It is as if they have been given a new vision of the world altogether, and in this new vision they have meaning and purpose and a workable approach to the challenges of being a human being. And of course, they no longer desire to drink or use drugs or engage in their addiction of choice. And I really like this idea that in this new vision, they have a meaning and purpose and a workable approach to the challenges of being a human being. And that's what the 12 steps gave me, a workable approach to living life. I didn't have a workable approach. It was my approach to living life prior to the 12 steps was very chaotic and was driven by desire and a reaction to the environment around me and addiction. So when I found the 12 steps and found that they really provided a formula for living for a workable approach to life, I grabbed onto them really quickly. It just made a lot of sense to me. The next thing that he says is, if there were no connection between the 12 steps and addiction and they simply existed as a spiritual path for humanity, I believe many more millions of people would have found and embraced them. The fact that these steps were originally intended to help alcoholics and later addicts has definitely limited their appeal. I know only 2 non-addict persons who have gone through the steps simply to experience their benefits. I am sure that there must be others, but probably very few. As stated, countless addicts and alcoholics the world over have gone through these steps and recovered from what they previously felt was a hopeless state of mind and body. And this echoes something that you hear a lot in 12-step meetings and from people who have gone through them, which is, wouldn't it be great if everybody went through these? Shouldn't we teach this kind of stuff to everybody, even if they're not addicts and alcoholics? Because it certainly seems like the values that you learn in the 12 steps about trying to put good things into life rather than take whatever you can get out of life. It seems like those kinds of values would be good for everybody to practice and to learn. And I definitely agree with that. I feel like I have learned more about being a good person from working the 12 steps than I did in my entire 40 years before I started doing that. It's been a relief, and I feel like part of the reason that it works so well is because there is a formula in how to approach not only a new way of thinking about life, but a new way of living it in the 12 steps. So I feel like I had a huge misperception about the 12 steps, what the 12 steps were before I started working them. I know that a lot of other people do too, because quite frankly, what we hear about them in popular culture and what people say about them, it doesn't reflect the actual amazing transformation that can result from working them. Other recovery programs have similar things. People can find, one that really comes to mind is Refuge Recovery, where they also have a formula for how do you live life? How do you approach life in general? And sobriety is a huge part of that approach. But it's also about more than that. It's about, okay, let's look at some of the ways that you approached life that created an environment where addiction could thrive. And let's change those ways and those approaches so that not only can addiction not thrive there, but you have no desire to have chemicals in your life like that. And so I really enjoyed this part of the book. I think he did a great job of talking about how the spiritual approach of the 12 steps is much different from the common perception of them as just a means of dealing with the wreckage of alcohol and drug use. That's certainly part of it, but it's not the most important part. It's the most important part is that the 12 steps are a guide to a spiritual journey, and that's been the part that's been most rewarding for me. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.